comes from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Paul Johnson, a Catholic writer, said in a conversation with Rabbi Sachs, "There have been, in the course of history, societies that emphasize the individual, like the secular West today, and there have been others that place weight on the collective, communist Russia, or China, for example. Judaism," he continued, "was the most successful example he knew of that managed the balance between both, giving equal weight to the individual and collective responsibility. Judaism was a religion of strong individuals and strong communities. This," he said, "was rare and very difficult, and constituted one of our greatest achievements." This insight allows us to see the argument of Parashat Noach in a way that might not have been obvious otherwise. The parasha begins and ends with two great events, the flood on the one hand and the Tower of Bavel on the other. The failings of the generation of the flood are explicit. It says in Psukim Kaf Aleph and Kaf Bet, "The world was corrupt before God, and the land was filled with violence. God saw the world, and it was corrupted. All flesh had perverted its way onto earth." Wickedness, violence, corruption, perversion. This is the language of systemic moral failure. In contrast to the flood, Bavel seems almost idyllic. In Perek Yud Aleph, Pasuk Aleph, it says, "Vayhi kol ha'aretz safa achat udvarim achedim." The entire earth had one language and one common speech. The builders of Bavel focused on construction. The Psukim speak of constructing themselves a city and a tower, Nivneh lanu ir umigdal. The language of the wrongdoing of Bavel is much more positive than the language used for the flood, so it is unclear what the sin of Bavel was. Yet, from the Torah's point of view, Bavel represented another serious wrong turn, because Hashem stopped their work and dispersed them. Then he summoned Abraham to begin an entirely new chapter in the religious story of humankind. Both of these stories represent a truth about the human situation as the Torah sees it. They represent the failures iterated by Paul Johnson. The flood tells us what happens to civilization when the individuals rule, and there is no collective. Bavel tells us what happens when the collective rules and individuals are sacrificed to it. The Torah's description of life before the flood was violence, death, corruption, a war of man against man. Bavel is the opposite. The people are united. Like it says, the entire land had one language and a common speech. We can learn about the issue of Bavel by comparing it to Paro, who enslaved Bnei Israel. In Bavel, it said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, lest we be scattered over the face of the earth." In Egypt, Paro said, "Come, let us deal wisely with them, lest they increase so much." The repeated "come, let us, lest" is too pronounced to be accidental. The comparison may be that Bavel, like Egypt, represents an empire that subjugates entire populations, completely getting rid of identities and freedoms. Interpreted this way, the story of Bavel is a critique of the power of the collective when it crushes individuality. When the rule of law is used to suppress individuals and their distinctive languages and traditions, this too is wrong. The greatness of monotheism is that unity in the belief of God creates diversity on earth, and God asks us to respect that diversity. So the flood and the Tower of Bavel, those seemingly polar opposites, are linked, and the entire Parashat of Noach is a study in the human condition. There are individualistic cultures and there are collectivist ones, and both fail. The former because they lead to violence, the latter because they lead to oppression. So Paul Johnson's insight turns out to be true. After the two great failures of the flood and Bavel, Abraham was called on to create a new form of social order that would give equal honor to the individual and the collective, personal responsibility, and the common good. That remains the special gift of the Jews and Judaism to the world. What we can learn from this is that we should always be conscious not to be too involved in ourselves, the individual, and not too overpowering over others so that you crush other people's individuality. Bavel crushed people's individuality, just like Paro crushed Bnei Israel's individuality because he felt threatened, he was jealous. And that is something that I see way too often in teenagers. And I think that it is an important lesson for all of us to learn, that we cannot let jealousy affect us, and we must let all judgment go and allow everyone to be absolutely themselves. I also think that understanding that the materialistic, vain side of all of us is harmful, and we need to find a balance between the two. We must focus on being ourselves, but recognizing that we are part of a larger group, community, nation, and world.